The night I found her standing outside my mansion in the rain was the night my heart began to remember what pain felt like. The storm had been raging for hours, its wind clawing at the windows of my house like a desperate hand begging to be let in. The world beyond the glass was a blur of silver and gray, rain slashing through the darkness in relentless sheets. I had been sitting alone in my study, a glass of whiskey half finished beside me, watching the flames in the fireplace sway like they were trying to escape. I told myself I liked the silence, that I preferred the company of wealth and walls to the noise of human connection. That lie had worked for years, until that night. When the security monitor blinked, I almost ignored it. I assumed it was another power flicker, or maybe a stray animal. But then the image sharpened, a small figure standing motionless at the gate. Even through the distortion of rain, I could see she was just a child, barely 8 or 9. A red balloon trembled in her tiny hand, glowing faintly under the security lights. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shivering. She just stood there, as if the storm itself had forgotten to touch her. I hesitated before stepping outside. The cold hit me like a wall, soaking through my coat instantly. My shoes sank into the muddy gravel as I walked toward her. Every instinct told me to turn back, that this wasn't my concern. But something about her stillness, about that fragile balloon defying the storm, kept pulling me forward. When I reached the gate, she lifted her face toward me. Her eyes were the kind of blue you only see in winter. Cold, pure, too deep for a child. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, her small fingers gripping the string so tight her knuckles were white. I cleared my throat, my voice strange against the roar of rain. "You shouldn't be out here. Where are your parents?" She blinked slowly, as if the question confused her. "I'm waiting," she said softly, the words nearly swallowed by the storm. "Waiting for who?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly, the way children do when they're about to say something that doesn't make sense. "Daddy's friend," she replied. "He said I'd find him here." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather. There was something hauntingly certain in her tone, something that made my heart stumble. I hadn't been anyone's friend in years, not since the world taught me that love was temporary and loyalty was expensive. "You must be mistaken," I said, forcing the words out. "No one told you to come here. You should go home." But she only smiled faintly, her lips trembling from the cold. "He said you'd say that." I froze. Before I could respond, a flash of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the world for an instant. In that brief glare, I saw her completely. The soaked yellow raincoat clinging to her small frame, the mud on her boots, the way her balloon seemed impossibly bright against the darkness. And then I saw something else, the reflection of my own face in the gate's wet metal. Older, emptier, lonelier than I remembered. Something inside me cracked a little. "Come on," I muttered, fumbling for the code on the gate's panel. "You can't stay out here." As the gate slid open with a groan, she stepped forward without hesitation. Her small shoes splashed through puddles as she followed me up the path, silent except for the faint squeak of her balloon rubbing against her coat. I didn't know why I was letting her in. I didn't know what I was supposed to say to her, but somehow the sound of her quiet footsteps behind me didn't feel intrusive. It felt right. Inside, the house was warm and glowing with golden light. She stopped in the foyer, gazing around with wide eyes. The marble floors, the grand staircase, the endless portraits on the walls, all things that had long stopped impressing me, seemed magical to her. "You live here?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. I nodded, slipping off my wet coat. "Yes, alone." She hugged her balloon close to her chest. "It's too big for one person." I almost laughed at that, but the sound got caught somewhere in my chest. "I like it that way," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. She looked up at me then, her small brow furrowing. studying me with that unnerving, childlike honesty that cuts deeper than words. My daddy said you're lonely. The words hit me harder than I expected. Clean, simple, and mercilessly true. The air between us shifted, thickening with something I couldn't name. For years, I'd built this house to keep the world out, to seal myself inside the safety of silence. But in a single sentence, this tiny stranger had stripped all of that away. Your daddy said that? I asked quietly. She nodded, smiling faintly, as though she'd just delivered a message long overdue. He said you needed someone to talk to. My throat tightened. I didn't know who her father was, how he knew me, or why this felt like a wound reopening. But as I looked at her, this small, rain-soaked messenger holding a trembling red balloon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The sting of tears. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the storm outside, softer now, as if it too was listening. Then, almost without thinking, I whispered, "What was your daddy's name?" She hesitated, eyes glimmering like wet glass. "You knew him," she said finally. "He said you were his best friend." And before I could ask anything more, thunder rolled across the sky and the lights flickered. She didn't flinch. I did. The rain pressed harder against the windows, and in its rhythm I heard something that sounded like a heartbeat. Steady, familiar, impossibly close. I turned toward the window, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure outside, standing where she'd been moments ago. But when I blinked, it was gone. I looked back at the girl. She was staring at me with a strange calmness, her balloon still glowing faintly red against the golden light of the room. "Are you okay?" I asked, forcing steadiness into my voice. She just nodded, then whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it. "He said you'd remember." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I had no idea what that meant, but the ache in my chest deepened. Before I could speak again, the storm outside broke completely. The power flickered, and for a heartbeat, the entire house went dark. In that darkness, I felt something, an emotion I hadn't let myself feel in so long I barely recognized it. Regret. When the lights came back on, the girl was still standing there, looking at me with eyes that held the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to face. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hidden by the echoing sound of rain. The rain hides his tears as he stares at her, realizing he doesn't even know why he's crying. I hadn't cried in a decade, not since I buried my heart under money and marble walls. The rain had finally softened, but the storm inside me hadn't. The girl's words kept replaying in my head, echoing against the hollow walls of my mansion like a melody I'd long forgotten how to listen to. I didn't even remember the last time I'd cried before tonight. Maybe when my parents died. Maybe when I lost my best friend. The only person who saw me as more than a balance sheet. Somewhere along the line, I decided emotion was weakness, and weakness was dangerous. So I built walls, expensive ones. Now, standing in my own living room, watching this drenched child with her red balloon stare at the art and chandeliers like they were pieces of another world, I realized how empty all of it truly was. She walked slowly, her shoes leaving little wet prints on the polished marble. Her tiny reflection moved beneath her, ghost-like, as if the house itself was surprised to see a living soul inside it again. "You must be hungry," I said, my voice low, awkward. "Would you like something to eat?" She turned toward me, her face lighting up in a way that made the air feel warmer. "Can I have hot chocolate?" That simple question hit me harder than any business deal or betrayal ever could. I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me for something so human. I nodded, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Of course." In the kitchen, as I fumbled with a saucepan I hadn't used in years, she wandered toward the old fireplace. The flames danced across her face, casting soft gold light in her eyes. She looked at home there, small and safe, like she belonged more than I ever did. Your house doesn't have any toys, she said after a while, glancing around. No, I replied. No toys. She thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Daddy said toys don't make you happy anyway. People do. My hands froze mid-stir. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. There it was again. Her father. That name I hadn't dared to speak in years. That ghost I'd tried to bury under success and marble floors. What did your daddy tell you about me? I asked carefully. She looked down, tracing a pattern on the rug with her shoe. He said you were lonely, but not bad. Just sad inside. My throat tightened. That sounded exactly like something he would have said. Gentle, honest, merciful to a fault. Did you know him well? I asked, half hoping she'd say no. She nodded solemnly. He used to work here. He said this house had too many lights but not enough smiles. Her words pierced through me like glass. I stepped closer, trying to keep my voice steady. What was your daddy's name? She looked up, her eyes glistening with something too deep for her age. Ethan, she said softly. The name hit me like a thunderclap. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Ethan, my oldest friend, my brother in everything but blood. The man who'd stood beside me before the world called me a billionaire. The man I'd pushed away after one cruel argument, too proud to apologize. And the man I'd never seen again because 2 months later, he was gone. Killed in a construction accident at one of my own properties. The saucepan hissed behind me, spilling over the edge. I turned the burner off mechanically, staring at the foam as it sizzled away. You knew my daddy, she said quietly, watching me. Didn't you? I nodded slowly, my voice breaking. Yes, I did. She tilted her head, studying me like she could see through the cracks in my composure. He told me you were brave, she said softly. He said you built all these big buildings because you were trying to build something no one could take from you. Her words twisted the knife deeper. She couldn't have known how true that was. How every brick, every tower I'd ever constructed had been my way of proving I was untouchable. But in that moment, I felt anything but. She wandered toward a shelf lined with photographs I hadn't looked at in years. Her small fingers brushed over the frames, leaving smudged traces of rainwater. Then she stopped at one photo. A picture of me and Ethan taken years ago. We were young, grinning like fools, standing in front of the foundation of our first project. Back then, we thought we'd build the world together. She turned the photo toward me, her expression unreadable. That's Daddy. My chest constricted. I took the picture from her trembling hands, staring at Ethan's familiar smile. For a long time, I couldn't speak. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to vanish, replaced by the cold weight of memory. I didn't know, I began, my voice hoarse. I didn't know you were his daughter. She didn't respond right away. Her gaze drifted to the flickering fire, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. He said you stopped talking after he left. That was when I felt the first tear slide down. It startled me. It had been so long since I'd cried that I didn't recognize the sensation. Hot, sharp, uninvited. I wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. But the moment I did, another followed. And another. Until I was standing there, shaking, unable to stop the flood I'd buried for years. She didn't look afraid. Instead, she walked over, her small hand reaching out to touch mine. Her fingers were tiny, cold, but somehow grounding. Daddy said it's okay to cry, she whispered. He said even big people need to sometimes. I let out a shaky breath that turned into a quiet laugh, though it sounded nothing like joy. I hadn't laughed in years either. Your father was a good man, I managed to say. Better than me. She looked up at me with a softness that broke me even more. He said you were his best friend. Her innocence was too much to bear. I turned away, setting the photo down on the table before it slipped from my hands. I felt every ounce of guilt, every moment of regret clawing its way up my throat. The house seemed to breathe around us, its silence no longer comforting but condemning. Every echo reminded me of the years I'd spent alone, convincing myself that solitude was peace, when it was really punishment. When I finally looked back at her, she was watching me with eyes that seemed to hold her father's patience, his quiet strength. And then, softly, so softly it was almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire, she asked the question that shattered what was left of me. "Do you miss him too?" She tilts her head and softly asks, "Do you miss him too?" The moment I said her father's name, every light in the study flickered, as if the house remembered him too. Her father's name still lingered in the air, echoing off the walls of my home like a sound the house itself had been waiting years to hear. Ethan. The syllables were heavy, weighted with guilt, history, and something I'd buried so deep that even I had forgotten how to face it. The moment I spoke it aloud, the chandelier above us trembled faintly, its light flickering in slow, rhythmic pulses. The girl noticed, too. Her eyes darted up, curious but unafraid. "Why did the lights do that?" she asked innocently. I swallowed hard, forcing a half-smile I didn't feel. "Old wiring?" I muttered. "This house is ancient." But that wasn't true. Every wire, every switch, every bulb in this place had been replaced, modernized, perfected. It was the one room I'd never touched, the study. The last place Ethan had stood before he left for the last time. "Come," I said softly, motioning for her to follow. "There's something I want to show you." She followed quietly, her red balloon brushing the walls as she walked behind me. Each step down the long hallway echoed like a heartbeat, slow and uneven. When we reached the door at the end, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle, a tremor running through my fingers. I hadn't opened this door in over 7 years. It had become a shrine to the version of me that died the same day Ethan did. When I finally turned the knob, the air that escaped the room felt cold, untouched by time. Dust floated in golden ribbons through the slanted light from the window. The faint scent of old paper and cedar still lingered. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His favorite chair sat by the window, his mug still resting on the desk beside the blueprints we'd once argued over. My reflection stared back at me from the glass frame of a photograph on the shelf. 2 men grinning at their first victory, back when dreams were bigger than bank accounts. The girl stepped inside quietly, her small shoes barely making a sound. She walked straight to the desk, running her hand along the wood with reverence. "Daddy said this was his favorite place," she whispered, almost to herself. I felt my throat tighten painfully. "It was," I said, the words catching in my chest. "He spent more hours here than I did. Said the light in this room made him think clearer." She smiled, brushing dust from a pencil that hadn't moved in years. "He said he was happy here, even when he was tired." I turned away, pretending to straighten a stack of papers, anything to avoid her eyes. Happy. The word burned in my chest. Ethan had been happy, even after I'd accused him of betrayal, even after I'd let pride drive a wedge between us. He'd still come to work every morning, still smiled, still gave me the best of himself. And what had I given him in return? A dismissal letter. A final goodbye without the courage to say it to his face. The silence between us thickened. I could hear the faint patter of rain starting again outside, soft against the window pane. "You knew my daddy well, didn't you?" she said, turning to look at me. "Yes," I said quietly. "He was the best man I ever knew." "Then why don't you come here anymore?" Her question hit me square in the chest. I didn't know how to explain to a child that guilt can make a person afraid of their own memories, that every corner of this room held a ghost of a conversation I never got to finish. "Because—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Some places remind us of what we've lost." She nodded slowly, as if she understood far more than she should have. Then she climbed into Ethan's old chair, the one I hadn't let anyone touch in years. She spun once, smiling faintly. "Daddy said you were funny when you got mad." Despite myself, I laughed. It was a hollow sound, but it was real. He wasn't wrong about that. She giggled softly, and for a moment the room felt lighter, like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. But then she stopped spinning, her expression shifting to something more serious. He said you two had a fight. The words froze me mid-step. I turned toward her slowly. He told you that? She nodded, hugging her balloon against her chest. He said it wasn't your fault, that sometimes people hurt the ones they care about most. I felt a lump form in my throat. I wanted to tell her the truth, that it was my fault, that I'd let my ambition poison a friendship that had once meant everything to me. But I couldn't find the strength to say it. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the desk, staring at the framed photo again. Your father he was like a brother to me, I said softly. But I didn't treat him that way at the end. The rain outside intensified, the sound like soft applause against the glass. The light in the room dimmed, shadows crawling across the walls. The chandelier flickered once more, longer this time, before steadying again. The girl didn't seem startled. She looked up at the ceiling as if listening to something. He's not angry, she said suddenly. I blinked, caught off guard. What? She turned back to me, her face calm, her voice sure. Daddy, he's not angry. He just wanted you to know that. A chill rippled through me. For a moment the room felt charged, alive. The air pressed in close, heavy with something unseen. I glanced toward the chair she was sitting in, the same one where Ethan had spent countless hours drawing plans, laughing, dreaming. And in the corner of my eye, I could almost swear I saw movement. A faint shimmer in the air, a trick of the light, or perhaps something more. The girl's gaze followed mine. She smiled softly, as if she saw it too. He likes that you kept his room the same, she whispered. The words hit me with a strange comfort and sorrow all at once. My vision blurred, though whether from tears or the dimming light, I couldn't tell. For the first time in years, I let myself breathe in the air of that room fully. I could almost hear him again, his easy laughter, his calm voice cutting through my temper, his words always grounding me. And then, in the quiet hum of the storm, a faint scent drifted through the air. Sandalwood and paper, Ethan's cologne, the same one I used to tease him about. I froze. The girl looked up, her expression unreadable, her eyes wide but not frightened. Do you smell that? I asked, my voice low. She nodded slowly. He's here. I wanted to deny it, to tell her it was impossible, but my throat closed around the words. Because deep down, part of me didn't want to deny it. Maybe the house wasn't the only one that remembered him. Maybe I did too, more vividly than I'd ever allowed myself to admit. The light above us flickered again, brighter this time, then dimmed until the room glowed in a soft amber hue. I turned to the girl, my chest aching, the weight of all my unspoken apologies pressing hard against my ribs. And then she looked up at me with those same steady blue eyes, her voice small but certain. Did you forgive him before he went away? The girl's innocent eyes look up at him as she whispers, Did you forgive him before he went away? I thought I'd locked away the past forever. But the past had written me a letter. The storm outside had quieted to a soft, rhythmic drizzle, the kind that lulled the world into a fragile silence. The study glowed faintly under the amber light, the air thick with the scent of old books and rain-soaked earth. I sat there long after she'd stopped speaking, staring at the empty chair across from me, Ethan's chair. The memory of his laughter clung to that space like a shadow that refused to fade. The girl stood beside the desk, her small fingers tracing the edges of the drawers, as if searching for something only she knew existed. Daddy said he left something for you, she murmured. I frowned, my pulse quickening. Something for me? She nodded. He said you wouldn't open it until it was time. I hesitated, unsure whether to indulge the strange comfort her words offered. But curiosity, or perhaps guilt, got the better of me. I pulled the top drawer open, the wood groaning softly after years of stillness. Inside lay pens, papers, old blueprints, and beneath them, an envelope, yellowed slightly with age but perfectly preserved. It was addressed to me. The handwriting stopped my breath, cold. I would have recognized it anywhere. Steady, deliberate, slightly slanted. Ethan. My fingers trembled as I lifted the envelope. The weight of it, heavier than paper, had any right to be. It was sealed, untouched, and on the back, written in faint pencil, were two words that made my chest constrict. For when you're ready. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure if I had the right to open it. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire, to pretend it didn't exist. The other part, the one I'd spent years silencing, wanted to tear it open and finally face what I'd run from all this time. The girl watched silently, her red balloon resting against her side. "It's okay," she said softly, as though sensing my hesitation. "He wanted you to read it." I broke the seal. The paper inside was delicate, the ink slightly smudged, but every word felt alive, as though they'd waited for me. "If you're reading this, then you've finally come back to the room I loved most. Thank you." My eyes blurred, and I blinked hard, forcing myself to keep going. "I know things didn't end the way they should have. I know we both said things we didn't mean. But I never blamed you. You gave me everything, a chance, a purpose, a dream. That was more than enough." My throat burned as I read on. "When you fired me, I knew why. I saw the fear in your eyes, the fear of losing control, the fear of not being enough. I carried that same fear once. I forgave you before I even left this building. You were my brother long before we built anything together." I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so badly the letter rattled in my grip. "I'm writing this because I don't want you to carry my ghost like a punishment. I want you to carry it like a memory, a reminder that you were loved and that you made a difference. You always did." The words blurred completely then. My chest heaved, and I realized I was crying, really crying, for the first time in years. Not the silent, frustrated tears of failure or loneliness, but the kind that come from something breaking open inside. The girl didn't move. She stood quietly beside me, eyes downcast, as if she understood the sacredness of that moment. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my chest before setting it gently on the desk. My voice cracked when I finally managed to speak. "He forgave me," I whispered. The words felt foreign and healing all at once. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, but the storm no longer felt cruel. It felt cleansing, like the sky was echoing my release. The girl climbed up onto the chair beside me, her tiny hand reaching for mine. Her palm was warm, grounding. "He said you'd be sad for a long time," she murmured, eyes on the letter. "But he also said you'd find your way back." I turned to look at her, unable to speak. She continued softly. "He told me to tell you thank you, for being his best friend." A sound escaped my throat, half laugh, half sob. "He was mine too," I said, the truth heavy but freeing. For a moment we just sat there, a broken man and a child connected by the ghost of a man who'd loved them both. The house seemed to breathe again. The ticking of the old clock on the wall resumed, faint but steady, like a heartbeat that had paused and now remembered how to live. Outside, rain trickled gently down the glass. The world felt softer somehow, lighter. I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting toward the letter once more. I knew I'd never lock it away again. It belonged here, in the open, where it could remind me that forgiveness, his and mine, was still possible. The girl's voice broke the quiet. "Daddy said you'd need me one day," she whispers. "Daddy said you'd need me one day." I'd eaten alone for so long, I forgot food could taste like laughter. The house had never smelled like breakfast before. It had smelled like money. Sharp, sterile, metallic, like marble floors and disinfectant, like silence wrapped in glass. But that morning, for the first time in years, it smelled like burnt toast and scrambled eggs. I didn't even remember the last time I'd used my own kitchen. Maybe back when Ethan was alive. Maybe never. She sat at the edge of the massive dining table, her little legs swinging off the chair, red balloon still tied to her wrist. The storm had stopped sometime during the night, but the air still hummed with the weight of everything that had changed. I stood over the stove, trying to remember how long toast was supposed to take. I'd burned 3 slices already. She giggled every time the smoke alarm chirped. "You're supposed to watch it," she said matter-of-factly, nose scrunching as she tried not to laugh. "I am watching it," I replied, waving smoke away with an expensive magazine. "It's just faster than I remember." Her laughter filled the kitchen. Light, unfiltered, and disarmingly real. I'd forgotten how that sound felt. It made the enormous, echoing house feel smaller, warmer, alive. I finally managed a half-decent breakfast. Toast slightly charred on the edges, eggs a bit too salty, orange juice that tasted like it came from a bottle older than her. Still, she clapped her hands like I'd created a feast. "It's perfect," she declared, taking a big bite. I couldn't help but smile. "You're lying." She grinned, her teeth flashing through a mouthful of toast. "Maybe a little." Her honesty made me laugh, a sound that startled me as much as it comforted me. It had been years since that sound came from me without being forced. I sat down across from her, watching her eat like it was the best meal she'd ever had. For the first time, I realized how hollow this room had been, how empty all those dinners alone had felt. The long table that could seat 20 had always been set with precision. Silver polished, plates aligned, wine poured but never touched. All for show. But today, there were just 2 plates. 1 child, 1 man, and more soul in that simplicity than in every expensive meal I'd ever had. She swung her feet gently and said, "Mom works a lot. She says tired is her job now." I paused mid-bite. There was no sadness in her tone, just acceptance. The kind children use when they've grown too used to disappointment. "She must work very hard," I said softly. "She does," she nodded, eyes down on her plate. "She says Daddy was her smile, and when he went to heaven she had to borrow smiles from me." Her words hit harder than I expected. I looked away, trying to swallow the ache in my throat. She was so young, yet she spoke like someone who'd already lost too much. I watched her reach for the orange juice, spilling a bit, but not caring. For a moment, she looked like every joy I'd ever missed, unafraid, unfiltered, free. She suddenly looked up, tilting her head with curiosity. "Do you always eat alone?" The question was innocent, but it hit like a knife. I wanted to lie, to say I preferred it, to say I liked quiet. But I didn't. I never had. I had built these walls, this house, this empire, all to avoid the silence that came after losing everyone who mattered. "I used to," I said finally, forcing a smile. "But not today." She smiled back, and for a second I thought I saw something of Ethan in her eyes, that same quiet kindness, that same ability to forgive without needing to be asked. We spent hours at that table. She talked about her school, her mother's favorite songs, how she hated broccoli but loved the color green. I listened, really listened, for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't the stories themselves that mattered. It was the sound of her voice. The way she filled the spaces in my heart I didn't realize were still empty. I told her stories too, about the lake I used to visit with her father, the nights we'd sleep under the stars after working long hours, dreaming about what we'd build one day. I left out the guilt, the greed, the argument that ended everything. But somehow I felt like she already knew. She giggled again when I burned another batch of toast for lunch. And this time, I didn't even try to hide my smile. "You're not a very good cook," she teased. "I'm not a very good anything," I admitted quietly. Her expression softened. "Daddy said you were good at being alone." The words struck deep. I looked at her, searching her face for malice, but there was none. She meant it as comfort, and somehow it worked. Maybe she didn't come here to remind me of my failures. Maybe she came to remind me of what I'd lost, and what I could still find. Afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, golden and warm. The mansion didn't look as cold anymore. It almost felt lived in. We sat there long after the plates were empty, just talking, laughing, and listening to the rain fade outside. I'd forgotten what it was like to feel human, to care about something that wasn't a deal, a company, or a headline. The house no longer felt haunted. Not by Ethan, not by my mistakes. For the first time, it felt like home. As I poured her another glass of juice, she looked up at me, mid-bite, eyes wide with an innocence that could shatter the strongest walls. "Can I come tomorrow too?" she asked. She looks up mid-bite and asks, "Can I come tomorrow too?" Every morning she came back, and with her came the sound of life returning to my home. It began quietly, like a habit I didn't mean to form. Each morning, just as the light touched the front lawn, I'd hear the faint creak of the gate. And there she'd be, the little girl with the red balloon and the brave smile, standing in the same spot where I first found her. Sometimes she'd wave. Other times, she'd simply wait until I opened the door, her eyes filled with that soft, wordless trust that made something deep inside me shift. Days blurred into weeks. My mornings that once began with silence and spreadsheets now began with laughter and crayons scattered across my dining table. She'd sit in the tall chair that once only collected dust and draw pictures. Messy, colorful, full of life. Most of them were of houses and trees, but occasionally she'd draw two people standing together under the rain. When I asked, she'd just smile and say, "That's you and Daddy." I didn't correct her. Maybe I didn't want to. We made a routine of it. Breakfast, stories, and the quiet comfort of simply existing together. She'd bring her school book sometimes, and I'd help her with math. She was bright, quick, and surprisingly serious when she wanted to be. "Daddy said numbers never lie," she once told me as she carefully added up a column of sums. I smiled and thought, no, but they also never heal. Her presence softened the mansion. Rooms that hadn't been touched in years now held the echoes of her footsteps. I found myself opening windows again, letting sunlight in. I even turned the garden lights back on for the first time since Ethan's funeral. Somehow she brought the world back into color. At night, when she'd gone home, I'd catch myself walking into the dining room just to see the faint smudge of her fingerprints on the glass table. Each mark was a reminder that I wasn't invisible anymore, that maybe I still had a reason to feel. But somewhere along the way, my gratitude became a quiet fear, the kind that only appears when you realize you care too much again. I started to notice things about her stories. The way she always mentioned her mother coming home late, tired and quiet. The way she talked about fixing things herself. A leaky tap, a broken heater, as if it was normal for a child to do. She never complained, but her eyes told the truth. They carried the same weight Ethan's used to. So, I did something I'd never done for anyone since him. I helped, quietly, carefully, without being seen. I called one of my old employees and arranged for grocery deliveries to her address. Fresh fruit, bread, milk. I sent a team to repair the cracks in their walls, the flickering lights, the broken window she mentioned in passing. I even made sure her mother's workplace received an anonymous donation to increase her salary. I didn't do it to feel good. I did it because, for once, the money that had built my cage could finally do something right. The change in me was so gradual, I almost didn't recognize it. My assistant, Margaret, noticed first. "You're smiling more," she said one morning. I brushed it off, pretending not to understand. But later that night, I caught my reflection in the window, and she was right. I looked alive. The girl had done what no therapist, no vacation, no fortune could. She'd reminded me that love wasn't a transaction. It was a quiet, persistent presence that turned empty spaces into homes. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting by the window before she arrived, pretending to be busy. I told myself I just wanted to make sure she was safe crossing the road. But the truth was simpler, and far more fragile. I missed her when she wasn't there. We began reading stories together. Children's books at first, but then poetry, the kind Ethan once loved. Her favorite was a poem about stars never truly dying, only moving farther away. She'd rest her chin on her hand and listen, eyes wide, as if the universe itself were whispering to her through the pages. "Daddy said stars are like promises," she once said. "Even when you can't see them, they're still there." I couldn't answer. My throat closed around the weight of memory. All I could do was nod. The days felt lighter. The house, warmer. For the first time since I could remember, I stopped checking the stock market. I stopped answering calls I didn't care about. I started waking up because I wanted to, not because I had to. And then, everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, coloring one of her endless pictures while I read the newspaper. The rain had started again, soft against the windows. She was humming, some tune that sounded vaguely familiar, one Ethan used to whistle while we worked late nights at the office. The sound wrapped around the room like a memory too beautiful to break. Then came the doorbell. Sharp, sudden, urgent. She froze mid-hum, her crayon still in her hand. I frowned and stood, confused. No one ever came here without calling. When I opened the door, she was standing there. A woman drenched from the rain, her eyes blazing with anger and fear. Her resemblance to Ethan was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same quiet strength, only now twisted by panic. "Are you—" she started, then her voice broke. "Are you the man my daughter's been visiting?" The girl had followed me to the doorway, clutching her balloon like a shield. "Mom," she began softly, but her mother cut her off, stepping forward. "What the hell have you been doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with equal parts rage and heartbreak. "Who do you think you are, bringing her into this house?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wanted to explain, to tell her I meant no harm, that her daughter had saved me in ways I couldn't begin to describe. But the words tangled in my throat. Behind her, lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw Ethan's face in hers. One afternoon, the doorbell rings, and her mother is standing there, furious. Her mother looked at me not with fear, but with the kind of anger born from old wounds. The rain hadn't stopped. It poured in sheets now, hammering against the marble steps, as if the sky itself was furious. She stood there, Ethan's widow, her soaked hair clinging to her face, her voice trembling with barely restrained rage. I had imagined meeting her again 1,000 different ways, but never like this. Not with her eyes full of betrayal. Her daughter stood behind her, small and frightened, red balloon wilting under the storm. The warmth that had filled this house for weeks evaporated in seconds, leaving behind a cold that felt sharper than the rain itself. "You think this is okay?" she said, her voice rising. "My daughter coming here, spending time with you. A man she doesn't even know." I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. "She found me by accident. I didn't plan any of this. You didn't stop it either," she snapped, cutting me off. "You just let her keep coming back." The accusation hit like a punch. She wasn't wrong. I had let it happen, selfishly, quietly, because her presence had filled the emptiness I'd spent years trying to ignore. "I never meant for her to get hurt," I said, trying to find the right words, but my voice came out cracked, brittle. "I only wanted to—" "To what?" she interrupted, stepping closer. "Buy your way back into peace? You think kindness and groceries erase what you did?" The words froze me in place. She knew. Of course she knew. Ethan's widow had every right to hate me. I had fired her husband before the accident, ended his career, destroyed his pride, sent him home broken. And a week later, that rain-soaked road took his life. I'd carried the guilt like a chain ever since. She looked at me now the way Ethan had looked at me that last day. Not with hate, but with disappointment. That was always worse. Her voice shook when she continued, "You took everything from us once. Don't you dare take her too." The girl's small hand clutched her mother's sleeve, her eyes darting between us, wide and wet. "Mom, he's not bad," she said softly. "He's my friend." Her mother stiffened, closing her eyes for a moment like the words physically hurt. "Sweetheart, you don't understand." The little girl tried again, stepping closer to me. "He reads to me, and he helps me with homework, and—" "That's enough!" Her mother's voice cracked like thunder, sharp and final. The girl flinched, and my chest tightened in helplessness. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I just wanted to help, that's all." She turned to me then, and for a fleeting moment the anger in her eyes faltered. I saw something else there. Exhaustion, grief, fear. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice low now. "We don't need your pity. You had your chance to do good when he was alive. You don't get to rewrite the past now because you're lonely." Her words hit deeper than any insult could have. They were raw, honest, and entirely deserved. I tried to speak, to tell her that this wasn't about guilt anymore, that it had become something else entirely. But she turned away before I could. She took her daughter's hand, pulling her gently toward the door. The little girl looked back at me, confusion clouding her innocent face. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said softly. Her mother stopped in her tracks, her shoulders tensing. She didn't turn around. "No, you won't." The words were meant for her daughter, but I felt them like they were meant for me. The front door opened, letting in the sound of rain and wind, and then they were gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't the same silence that had lived in this mansion for years. That one was cold, indifferent, predictable. This one was alive, pulsing, aching, filled with the echoes of laughter that would never return. I stood there for a long time, staring at the open door as rainwater pooled on the marble floor. My heart felt like it had been carved out, leaving behind a hollow space where warmth used to be. The rooms seemed darker than before, the walls taller. Even the clock ticked slower, as if mourning her absence. I wandered back into the dining room, half expecting to see her drawings still spread out across the table. But they were gone. Only a faint ring from her juice glass remained, a ghost of her presence. I sat down heavily in the same chair she used to occupy, running my hands through my hair. The house was silent again. Utterly, painfully silent. For the first time in a long time, I realized what it truly meant to be alone. Not the kind of loneliness that comes with wealth or power, but the kind that comes when you've finally felt love, only to lose it again. Hours might have passed, maybe more. The storm outside had faded to a dull drizzle when I finally noticed something near the doorway, a small folded piece of paper lying on the floor. I walked over and picked it up carefully, afraid it would fall apart in my hands. It was damp from the rain, edges curled, but the colors still shone through, bright crayon strokes of red, blue, and yellow. It was a drawing. Two figures stood side by side beneath a wide, smiling sun. One tall, one small, both holding hands. Between them floated a red balloon, and above, in uneven handwriting, were two words that cracked something deep inside me. My friend. I sank to my knees, clutching the paper like it was the most fragile thing in the world. My throat tightened, and before I could stop it, tears blurred the colors. She saw me as a friend, not a monster, not a mistake, not a ghost of the man who'd ruined her father's life. Just a friend. It was the purest kind of forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need words. He unfolds it. It's a crayon drawing of him smiling, labeled, "My friend?" You never realize how loud laughter is until it disappears. The rain stopped days ago, but the house still sounded like it was drowning. Every step echoed too long. Every clock ticked too loud. Silence had a shape now. It lived in the corners, in the dust that settled over untouched plates, in the empty chair across from me. Every morning, I found myself standing by the gate. The same spot where I'd first seen her. Tiny, bright, holding that red balloon against the storm. I'd stand there, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring down the road that led to nothing. At first, I told myself she'd come back once her mother calmed down. Maybe a week, maybe 2. Kids forget fights. They forgive easily. They come back to where they felt safe. But she didn't. Days turned into weeks. The balloon tied to the mailbox had long deflated, a wrinkled ghost of color fluttering in the wind. The laughter that once echoed through the halls of my mansion had vanished, replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only heartbeat this house had left. I tried to keep busy. Meetings, investments, dinners I didn't taste. But everything felt gray. Even money had stopped meaning anything. Some nights, I'd sit in the study with her father's letter, the one I'd found in the drawer. I must have read it 100 times, tracing the fading ink where he'd written, "Thank you for being my friend." Friend. Such a simple word, and yet I had never truly understood it until a child reminded me what it meant. The guilt settled deeper with every passing day. I had hurt her father, and somehow in trying to fix that, I had hurt her too. It felt like a curse, one I had written myself, line by line, with every selfish decision. I told myself I wouldn't cry again. But on the 12th day, I did. It happened without warning. I was sitting in the dining room staring at the chair she used to occupy, when it hit me. The sound of her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when I burned the toast, the way she'd hum little songs under her breath while drawing. And suddenly, the walls seemed to close in. The emptiness wasn't quiet anymore. It was screaming. That's when I realized it wasn't loneliness that was killing me. It was loss. I stopped sleeping. Nights bled into mornings. The staff whispered, worried. They said I looked sick, that I should take a break, go somewhere warm. But how do you leave a house that still feels haunted by someone who isn't dead? Then, one afternoon, as I sat at my desk, my phone rang. It startled me, a sharp, unfamiliar sound in the quiet. I almost didn't answer, but something inside told me to. Hello? My voice came out rough, like I hadn't used it in days. There was a pause on the other end, just static at first. Then a woman's voice, calm, professional, but heavy with something unspoken. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Who is this?" "This is Nurse Ellen from St. Mary's Children's Ward," she said gently. "Are you available to talk?" My chest tightened instantly. Children's Ward. My pulse began to race. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Is something wrong?" Another pause. Papers rustled in the background. Then she said, "We've had a young patient here for a few days. She was in a minor accident. Nothing critical, but she's been quiet, withdrawn." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. I already knew who she meant, even before she said it. "She keeps asking for someone," the nurse continued. "She says you're her friend, that you read her stories." My throat closed. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "Her mother didn't want us to contact you," the nurse added carefully. "But the child insists. She says you promised to help her dad's light stay on." That last line hit me like lightning. Those were her words, her father's light, the promise. I felt my entire body go still. Memories flashed. The way she'd smile when I fixed a broken lamp. The way she'd giggle and say, "Daddy said lights make sad people happy." The nurse's voice softened. "Mr. Hale, would you like to come see her?" I didn't realize I was already standing until the chair scraped behind me. My hand trembled as I pressed the phone to my ear. "Yes," I said, the word breaking out like a sob. "Please, tell her I'm coming." The nurse hesitated for a moment. "She'll be happy to hear that?" She's been waiting by the window every evening. Said she knows you'll come when it rains again." I turned toward the window then, and as if on cue, a drop of rain slid down the glass. Another followed. Within seconds, the sky opened up, the storm returning just like it had the night we met. It was as if the world itself had been waiting too. I grabbed my coat, heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in a long time, urgency, hope, fear, all tangled together. As I stepped outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind howled through the iron gates. I glanced once at the deflated balloon still tied to the mailbox, torn, faded, but somehow still there. I untied it, holding it for a moment. It felt like holding a piece of her. Fragile, small, but stubbornly bright even in the dark. The car engine roared to life. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward business meetings or empty penthouses. I was driving toward something real, something that mattered. The rain fell harder, blurring the road ahead, but I didn't care. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, because for the first time since she stopped coming, I knew exactly where I needed to be. A nurse's voice says, "The child keeps asking for you." When I saw her tiny hand clutching that same red balloon, something inside me broke completely. The hospital smelled like rain and antiseptic, that strange mix of life and sorrow that clings to every hallway. I walked through the corridors feeling heavier with every step, my reflection flickering across the glass doors, each one showing a man I barely recognized anymore. The billionaire mask I'd worn for years, the one made of steel, pride, and silence, had cracked long ago. Now I was just a man following the sound of his own guilt. The nurse led me to a quiet room near the end of the hall. The curtains were half drawn, pale sunlight spilling through in thin lines. And there, in the middle of all that sterile white, she sat, a little girl with tangled hair, clutching a red balloon like it was the most precious thing in the world. She turned her head before I could speak. When her eyes found me, she smiled. Small, tired, but real. That single look undid me completely. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would," I said, though my voice trembled. I tried to smile, but something deep in my chest was already breaking apart. She patted the chair beside her bed, and I sat down slowly, afraid that even breathing too loudly would disturb the fragile peace of the room. Her hand reached out for mine, so small it barely covered my fingers. "I kept it," she said, nodding toward the balloon. "The one from your gate. Mommy said I shouldn't, but Daddy said it was special." I glanced at her mother then, sitting quietly on the other side of the room. She looked exhausted, her eyes red, her face pale. There was no anger now, only something that looked a lot like regret. When our eyes met, she spoke softly. "I didn't want her to bother you again. I thought I was protecting her, but she never stopped talking about you. About the stories, the toast, the lights." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong about you." I shook my head, my throat tightening. "You were right to protect her. I wasn't ready for her kindness. I didn't deserve it." The girl frowned slightly. "Daddy said you're not bad," she said in her tiny, certain voice. "Just lonely, like him." Those words hit harder than anything I'd ever heard. The air left my lungs. It felt like her father himself had spoken through her. The same gentle tone, the same quiet understanding I'd buried years ago. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I could only look at her, this small, brave child who carried more light than anyone I'd ever met. She tugged on my hand. "Do you still read stories?" I managed a shaky laugh. "Only the sad ones." "Then read me one," she said softly. "But make it happy this time." So I did. I pulled a small storybook from the bedside table, one of those colorful ones with animals wearing suits, and started to read. My voice shook at first, but as she leaned her head against my arm, something inside me steadied. Her breathing slowed. Her grip on the balloon loosened just a little, and for a moment I imagined we were back in my dining room, surrounded by burnt toast and laughter. When I looked up, her mother was watching us. Tears streamed down her face silently, her hand pressed to her lips. "She talks about her father often," she said quietly. "She thinks he still visits her in dreams. Says he sends her signs. Little things, like lights flickering or songs on the radio." I swallowed hard. "He does," I said softly. "He's been visiting me too." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't question it. Maybe she understood. Maybe she'd seen enough strange beauty in the world to know some promises don't end with death. The nurse peeked in, smiling warmly before slipping out again. The storm outside had stopped, leaving behind a deep, quiet calm. The girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Are you sad again?" she asked sleepily. I shook my head. "Not this time." She smiled. "Good. Daddy doesn't like when you're sad." Her words sent chills through me. "He told you that?" She nodded, yawning. "He says, when you smile, the lights come back." I didn't know what to say. So I just sat there, holding her hand, watching the sunlight shift across the walls. Her mother stood, crossing the room quietly. She placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "She was meant to find you," she said in a broken whisper. I think he sent her." The weight of that sentence sank deep into me. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest didn't feel like punishment. It felt like purpose. I looked down at the girl, her small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. The red balloon floated lazily by the window, brushing against the glass, glowing faintly in the afternoon sun. For years, I'd built walls to keep the world out. Walls made of stone, fear, and silence. But this child had walked right through them with nothing more than kindness and truth. And somehow, in doing so, she had brought her father's light back to me. The mother whispers, "She was meant to find you." For the first time, I made a promise that money couldn't buy. The drive back from the hospital was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the rain on the windshield. But inside me, something had shifted. A quiet, unfamiliar peace had begun to take root where guilt once lived. I wasn't sure what had changed exactly, only that for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading somewhere that mattered. The next morning, I was back at the hospital. I brought flowers, simple daisies, the kind her mother said she liked, and a storybook the little girl hadn't read yet. She was sitting up in bed this time, pale but smiling, her small fingers wrapped around the ribbon of that same red balloon. "Mommy's better today," she said brightly. She smiled when she saw the flowers. I smiled too. "Then we'll bring more tomorrow." Her mother's recovery was slow, but steady. She spoke to me with soft gratitude, her earlier anger replaced by exhaustion and something deeper, understanding. She told me about their struggles, about how her husband's death had left them lost, drifting between bills and broken dreams. I didn't offer money this time. I offered time, my presence, my hands, my patience. That was how it began. When her mother was well enough to leave the hospital, I invited them both to stay at the mansion for a while. At first they hesitated. Maybe they still saw the walls of this house as cold and unwelcoming, but the little girl's excitement was enough to convince her mother to accept. The day they returned, the mansion changed. The silence that had haunted its halls began to fade. Laughter echoed again. Soft at first, like it was testing the air, then louder, bolder. The staff smiled more. Even the sunlight seemed to linger longer in the rooms. We began sharing dinners at the long table that had once been a monument to loneliness. The girl insisted on helping cook, which usually meant flour everywhere and toast that burned just right. She made the kind of mess that felt like life, and for once I didn't want to clean it up. Her mother often watched from the doorway, her eyes softening as she saw her daughter's happiness bloom again. Sometimes she joined us. Other times she simply sat quietly, hands folded, as though watching her late husband's memory being healed right before her eyes. One evening, after dinner, The girl tugged on my sleeve. "Can we go see the lights?" She meant the garden, the one her father used to help me design before he passed away. We stepped outside, and the garden lamps flickered on one by one, casting warm pools of gold on the path. She gasped softly every time another light came alive, as if magic was following her footsteps. I looked down at her and smiled. "They must like you." She grinned, holding my hand tighter. "Daddy says lights come on when people are happy." Her words lingered in the air long after she'd gone to bed that night. I stood by the window for hours, watching the lights flicker in the garden, thinking about what her father had said years ago. That light was just another word for hope. In those quiet moments, I realized something simple, something I'd been blind to for too long. I had spent my life chasing the illusion of happiness through wealth, but real warmth didn't come from gold or marble or glass towers. It came from people, from the small, messy, imperfect moments that make you feel alive. And so I made a promise, not in words, but in the quiet choices that followed. I promised to be there, to show up every day for her and her mother. I promised to protect, to listen, to care. I promised not to let loneliness rule my life again. In the weeks that followed, I found myself doing things I never thought I'd enjoy. Painting walls that had faded, fixing an old swing in the backyard, reading bedtime stories until I fell asleep mid-sentence. Each day felt like another layer of frost melting off my heart. The mansion, once a fortress of silence, had become a home. One evening, I walked into her room after she'd fallen asleep. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting silver lines across her face. She lay there, clutching her red balloon. Still the same one from that night, though now it was faded and fragile, barely holding its shape. Her breathing was soft, steady. I stood there watching her, the weight of peace and sadness mixing in my chest in a way I couldn't explain. Then, in the stillness, her lips moved. A whisper, soft, almost inaudible. "Daddy says thank you." The words hung in the air like a prayer. I froze, unsure if I'd really heard it or if my mind was playing tricks. But as I stood there, a gentle warmth filled the room, a flicker of light from the corner, like a bulb humming softly to life. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to see the shimmer of tears in my eyes reflected in the window pane. I knelt by her bedside, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "Tell him," I whispered back, my voice breaking, "that I'm sorry it took me so long." Outside, a single garden lamp blinked, just once, then glowed steady again. And in that quiet, golden light, I knew the promise wasn't just to her. It was to him, too. One night, as she falls asleep, she murmurs, "Daddy says thank you." I woke to the sound of his voice, the one I thought I'd never hear again. That night, sleep came slowly. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the garden lights that shimmered faintly through the curtains. The air felt still, heavy, but peaceful, as though the world itself had paused to rest. I sat in the study long after midnight, the letter from her father lying open on the desk, my fingers tracing its creases the way one might trace the outline of an old scar. His handwriting was steady, deliberate, every word a mirror of the man I'd known, loyal, honest, gentle, the man I'd failed, the man whose loss had haunted me through every success, every luxury, every lonely night that money could not fill. I closed my eyes, exhaustion finally pulling me under. When I opened them again, I wasn't in the study anymore. The air smelled of pine and rain, the scent of the old workshop where we used to build things together, back before everything fell apart. Light streamed through the tall windows, warm and golden. And there he was, sitting in his old chair, sleeves rolled up, that same quiet smile playing on his lips. For a long moment I couldn't move. I just stared, afraid that if I blinked, he'd disappear. "You kept your promise," he said simply. His voice was exactly as I remembered, calm, grounded, carrying the weight of someone who had already made peace with the world. I swallowed hard. The words caught in my throat. "I should have said it sooner," I managed. "I should have told you I was sorry." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You just did." I took a step closer, heart pounding. "Why her?" I asked, almost whispering. "Why send your daughter to me?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes gentle. "Because you needed each other. I couldn't help her from where I am, but she could help you remember who you are." My vision blurred. I didn't deserve that kind of grace. "None of us ever do," he said, his smile widening just a little. "But that's the beauty of it. Love doesn't ask who deserves it. It just stays." I wanted to tell him everything, how she'd changed me, how her laughter filled this house, how her words healed a wound I didn't know still bled. But before I could speak, the workshop began to fade. The light grew brighter, flooding every corner until all I could see was gold. His voice was the last thing I heard before it all vanished. "Take care of them, and don't forget to live." My eyes opened to the sound of morning birds outside the window. The study was filled with soft sunlight, spilling across the desk, painting everything in hues of pale gold, the same color as the light in my dream. For a moment, I sat still, my breath shallow, unsure if what I'd seen had been real. But the warmth lingering in the air told me it had been more than a dream. It had been a farewell. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes again. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of him, of her, of everything I'd once lost and somehow found again. When I finally stood, something on the floor caught my eye. A small drawing that must have fallen from the desk. I picked it up carefully. It wasn't old. The crayon colors were still bright, the lines uneven but full of life. It showed 3 figures: a tall man, a woman, and a little girl holding a red balloon. Above them, in a child's scrawl, were the words, "My family." Before I could even process the image, I heard the sound of running footsteps in the hallway. "Mr. Hale! Mr. Hale!" Her voice was breathless and bright, full of excitement. She burst into the room, hair a tangled mess, holding another drawing in her tiny hands. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes wide with pride. "Look what I made," she said, waving the paper. I knelt down as she thrust it toward me. It was almost identical to the one I'd just found. 3 figures standing side by side, a red balloon floating above them. Only this time there was a sun in the corner, shining over them all. "It's us," she said, grinning. "Me, Mommy, and you." I couldn't speak. The dream, her father's words, the light, everything converged in that single moment. I swallowed hard, smiling through the sting in my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She climbed onto my lap, resting her head against my chest. "Daddy said families don't have to be the same to stay together," she murmured sleepily. The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. Warm, alive, sacred. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. The ghosts that had haunted me were gone. The mansion wasn't just full of light. It was full of love. I glanced toward the window where sunlight bathed the walls, and for a brief second I could have sworn I saw a shadow there. A man standing by the garden, smiling. And just like that, the light shimmered once and faded softly away. The girl runs in holding a drawing, her mom, and him, together as a family. Once, my mansion was filled with silence. Now, it echoes with love. It happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it. The way life crept back into the corners of my home, the way laughter began to fill the air where dust once lived. The mansion, which had once stood as a monument to isolation, was no longer a hollow shell of stone and memory. It was alive again. The mother and daughter moved in slowly, tentatively at first. A few bags, then boxes, then pieces of their world began blending into mine. A pink sweater left on a chair, a half-finished drawing on my desk, a mug with chipped paint resting beside the coffee maker. They didn't take over the house. They filled it gently, without force. Mornings began with music and the smell of pancakes instead of the sterile quiet I used to mistake for peace. The little girl ran through the halls with her red balloon, her laughter echoing off the marble in a way that made the place feel smaller, warmer. Sometimes I'd find her mother standing at the window, watching her daughter play outside, a soft smile on her face. When our eyes met, she'd give me a nod, one that said everything without a single word. Gratitude, understanding, something deeper than either of us could articulate. I didn't know when it happened exactly, but the mansion no longer felt like mine. It felt like ours. There were still quiet moments, nights when I sat in my study, reading or thinking, but even those moments felt different now. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. Still, there was one thing left undone. One morning, I told them I'd be out for a few hours. The little girl asked where I was going, and I told her, "To see an old friend." She smiled knowingly, as if she already understood. The drive out of the city took longer than I remembered. The rain had returned, soft and steady, turning the world outside the windshield into watercolor. The road wound through hills and trees until I reached a small cemetery by the edge of town, the place I hadn't visited in years. I parked near the gate, stepping out into the quiet. The air was cool, damp, and alive with the scent of earth and grass. I walked slowly, past rows of markers, until I found the one that stopped me cold. Michael Thompson. I stood there for a long time, my umbrella forgotten at my side, the rain soaking through my coat. His grave was simple, unadorned except for a small stone angel someone had placed there long ago. Kneeling down, I set the red balloon beside it. The string was frayed, the color faded, but it still held its shape, stubborn, bright, defying gravity just as it always had. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," I said softly, the words catching in my throat. I didn't know how to face what I'd done, or what I'd lost. The rain fell harder, but it felt cleansing now, not punishing. "You were right," I whispered. "I was lonely, and I thought money could fill that emptiness, but it just built higher walls. She broke them, though, your daughter. She broke every single one." A faint wind passed through the trees, bending them gently. For a moment, it felt like the world was listening. "She's safe now," I said, my voice trembling. "She's happy. So is her mother. You can rest." I placed my hand against the cold stone, closing my eyes. "Thank you for sending her to me." When I finally stood, the clouds began to part. A beam of sunlight cut through the gray, landing right where the balloon sat beside the grave. It glowed red against the light, brighter than ever, a small, defiant spark of life. I turned to leave, but as I stepped away, the wind picked up again. The balloon tugged gently against its string, then slipped free. I watched as it rose into the sky, slowly at first, then higher, higher still. The red stood out vividly against the pale blue, floating upward until it was nothing but a dot swallowed by sunlight. For the first time in years, I didn't chase what was leaving me. I let it go. Because I understood now, love wasn't about holding on. It was about learning when to release, when to trust that what's gone has simply changed form. The weight that had sat on my chest for so long was gone. I could finally breathe. As I walked back to the car, the world felt brighter, lighter. The mansion waited for me, not as a monument to grief, but as a home filled with laughter, warmth, and second chances. When I arrived, the little girl was already by the gate, waving excitedly, her mother smiling behind her. "Did you see him?" she asked. I smiled, kneeling to her level. "I think I did." She looked up at the sky, where a faint red dot still lingered far, far away. "He found it," she said softly. "Yes," I said, following her gaze. "He did." We walked back inside together, hand in hand. The lights flickered on as we entered. Not out of emptiness this time, but joy. The mansion glowed warm and golden, filled with voices, with love, with life. It was no longer a house haunted by memories. It was a home built on promises kept, forgiveness found, and light, the kind that never truly fades. As he turns to leave, the red balloon slips from his hand, rising into sunlight, floating free, just like him. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Leave a comment and tell me what moment broke you the most. Hit the like button if you believe even broken people can find light again. Subscribe for more stories that remind you what it means to feel human again. And remember, sometimes the smallest promise can change everything.